Welcome to the final episode of our three-part series looking into the 12 elements of the near-death experience, drawing on the research of Pim van Lommel and his 10-year study of near-death experiences. Let's begin with the flash forward, or preview of what is to come. There are moments in life when time seems to momentarily lift its veil, offering glimpses of what has yet to come. For those who have had a near-death experience, these glimpses can be shockingly vivid, detailed, and, most astonishingly, accurate. Some near-death experiencers report witnessing scenes from their own future as though watching a movie reel of events yet to unfold. These are not vague premonitions or cryptic symbols to be deciphered. Rather, they are crystal-clear previews of precise moments in their upcoming lives. What's even more remarkable is that many of these premonitions have later proven to be entirely accurate, down to the smallest detail. One of Pim van Lommel's subjects described a strikingly specific premonition during his NDE. In an instant, he saw his entire future unfold before him. He saw the deaths of both his wife and his mother, events he could not have anticipated. Compelled to record his visions, he later checked them off one by one as they came to pass. One particularly eerie detail stood out. In his vision, his wife lay on her deathbed wrapped in a white shawl. Years later, just before her passing, she was given the exact same shawl by a friend, a detail no one could have foreseen. How is this possible? How can someone glimpse events that haven't happened yet? The answer lies in the very nature of time itself. According to Seth, time is not a rigid, linear sequence of events marching forward from past to present to future. Instead, it is a vast, multi-dimensional landscape where all possible futures already exist, waiting to be selected and experienced. Imagine reality as a quantum wave function, an infinite sea of possibilities. Every moment presents countless probable futures, each of them equally valid, until one is chosen. Just as a particle in a quantum experiment exists in multiple states until observed, our future is not set in stone. It is shaped and drawn to us by our beliefs, emotions, and expectations. Seth explains that we are constantly selecting which probable future to manifest, based on the energy we put into our thoughts and emotions. Like a radio tuning into different stations, we align ourselves with certain probabilities, drawing events into our experience that most closely match our dominant state of mind. However, some futures are far more likely than others. If a person's thoughts and feelings remain consistent, their future may seem predictable, not because it is fated, but because they are attracting it through their own energy. Seth emphasizes that no future is inevitable. Even when all probabilities seem to be flowing in one direction, a person can still shift their trajectory if they become aware of their creative power and consciously choose to alter their beliefs and intentions. Thus, the flash forward in an NDE may not necessarily be an ironclad prophecy, but rather a glimpse into one of the most likely probable futures at the time of the experience. If that future remains the strongest, it will unfold exactly as foreseen. If the experiencer makes different choices, the timeline may shift, and the previewed events may never come to pass. As NDEers move deeper into the experience, they often reach a boundary, a point of no return. It might appear as a gate, a bridge, a river, a vast chasm, or even a simple invisible line. No matter the form, one thing is clear: if they cross it, they will not be coming back. Some describe this moment as a profound homecoming, an arrival at a realm of indescribable peace and completeness. Everything within them longs to continue forward, but then a presence steps in. Sometimes it's a deceased loved one, sometimes it's the being of light. One of van Lommel's subjects described standing before a gate. Beyond it stretched a landscape so familiar and inviting that it felt as though he were returning after an arduous journey. The peace was beyond anything he had ever known. He felt an overwhelming pull to step forward, to finally go home. But then, a realization. He became aware of his lifeless body below. He saw his wife, his 3 small children, and then he understood he had a choice. If he stepped beyond the gate, he would never return. His physical life would end. But if he chose to turn back, he could return to his family, to the life he had left behind. Faced with this decision, he chose to return, And yet, despite making that choice, he carried with him the unshakable knowledge that what he had experienced was more real than anything he had ever known. If the NDE up to this point had been an experience of limitless love, freedom, and joy, the return to the physical body is a rude awakening. It is abrupt, painful, and often traumatic. Many report being forcefully pushed back, sometimes by a spiritual presence, sometimes by an unseen force, and sometimes simply by the realization that they are needed elsewhere. One of van Lommel's subjects described it as being slammed back into his body as if he had been thrown from a great height. His return was met not with relief, but with fury. For a moment, he had been on the threshold of paradise, and now he was back in a damaged, aching, sick body, surrounded by frantic doctors shouting and slapping his face. The contrast was so overwhelming that he felt an uncontrollable rage toward the very people who had saved him. He wanted nothing more than to return to the place he had just left. And yet, he could not deny that he had returned for a reason. Seth acknowledges this reluctance. Many who die do not want to come back, and often they don't. But for those who do return, it is because their inner selves have chosen to continue their journey on earth. Seth explains that while we often fear death while alive, many souls who have passed are in no rush to return. Having stepped beyond the illusions of time and limitation, they are eager to explore the greater realms of consciousness. However, if unfinished lessons remain, or if there is a deep, pressing purpose left unfulfilled, then the soul may decide, sometimes at the very last moment, to return to physical life. This, Seth says, is always a conscious choice, even if it does not seem so at the time. The soul, seeing a larger perspective, may recognize that there is still something vital to accomplish in this life. The return to the body is almost never a simple waking up. It is a transformation. The person who returns is not the same person who left. Many who have undergone an NDE come back with a renewed sense of purpose. They are no longer afraid of death. They often develop a deeper sense of empathy, a loss of interest in material pursuits, and a powerful urge to live in alignment with love and compassion. And some return with something even more remarkable: new abilities. Their intuition is heightened. Their psychic senses are awakened. Many report experiencing synchronicities, seeing auras, or sensing the emotions of others with uncanny accuracy. Electronic devices frequently malfunction in their presence. They have touched something beyond the veil, and they carry its imprint back into the waking world. So, what does this tell us? It tells us that consciousness does not belong to the brain. It tells us that death is not the end, but merely a transition. It tells us that the future is not fixed, but fluid, shaped by our own thoughts and beliefs. And most importantly, it tells us that life has meaning. So, what happens after the return? How do NDEers integrate this profound experience into their daily lives? And what lessons does it hold for the rest of us? The changes that unfold after a near-death experience are nothing short of seismic. They don't fade like the details of a dream. They don't wash away with time like a hallucination. Instead, they take root, permanently altering the experience's sense of self, their values, and even their very perception of reality. But here's where things get even more interesting. These transformations almost always lean toward a moral and ethical shift, one that aligns with a consciousness-based paradigm rather than a materialist one. Why does this matter? Because if the near-death experience were just a bizarre trick of the dying brain, we wouldn't expect to see such deep, long-lasting personality changes. Yet we do. And they are profound. An NDE is not just an event, it's an initiation. In a matter of moments, experiences are catapulted beyond the ordinary confines of space and time, encountering dimensions of reality far beyond what they once thought possible. Many return with an unshakable realization. Consciousness is not limited to the brain, death is not the end, and everything is interconnected. This crisis of insight can be overwhelming. It's not a matter of adopting new beliefs based on faith. It's about directly experiencing an entirely different level of existence and then having to return to a world that no longer makes sense in the way it once did. In the Western world, this can be particularly difficult. Society places a heavy emphasis on material success, on money, status, power, and competition. But after an NDE, these things often seem meaningless. The priorities of the past collapse. What once seemed important now rings hollow. This is why integrating the experience can be so challenging. Interestingly, this shift isn't quite as difficult in cultures where spirituality and reincarnation are already accepted as part of life. In places like India, for example, NDEs tend to be more easily assimilated because they reinforce already existing cultural and philosophical frameworks. In the West, however, where the dominant worldview tells us that the brain creates consciousness and that death is the end, this kind of experience can feel like an existential wrecking ball. So, what happens next? How do NDEs change, and what does that tell us about what really matters in life? For an NDE, death is no longer something to be feared. They have seen what's on the other side, and it wasn't nothing. Many return with an unshakable certainty that consciousness continues after physical death. This isn't an abstract belief. It's lived knowledge. Imagine the freedom this brings. The crippling existential fear that dominates so much of human life vanishes. Death is no longer a looming abyss, but simply a transition, a step into another kind of existence where their individuality remains intact. This is not wishful thinking. It is the overwhelming consensus among those who have had an NDE. Perhaps the most beautiful transformation is what happens to an NDE's sense of self-worth. Before, many were consumed by self-doubt, weighed down by the expectations of others. But after an NDE, everything changes. They return with a deep, almost unshakable self-acceptance, a profound realization that they are enough just as they are. They no longer need external validation. They stop performing for approval. Many describe feeling bathed in unconditional love during their experience, and this realization carries over into their daily lives. They become more compassionate, more fearless, and more willing to take risks. And here's something fascinating. NDEs often report that love, not achievements, not wealth, not status, is the only thing that truly matters. The way they treat others is what counts. Every action, every interaction, every word, it all has a ripple effect. If they had once been selfish or unkind, the NDE makes it painfully clear that is not the way. NDEs often emerge with an astonishing level of empathy. They forgive more easily, they judge less, and they develop a deep-seated respect for life itself, not just human life, but all life. This newfound compassion often manifests in radical life changes. Many NDEs leave jobs that no longer align with their values. Police officers and military personnel find they can no longer engage in violence. Executives in high-stress, high-money industries walk away from their careers. Instead, many take up helping professions, becoming teachers, nurses, social workers, or counselors. They feel called to be of service. Even in their personal lives, relationships take center stage. They become more open, more expressive, and more present with the people they love. The pointless striving for power, possessions, or status, gone. In its place, a deep, unshakable reverence for the simple beauty of existence. After a near-death experience, people don't just live, they live differently. Time slows down. They become more present, more attentive to the moment. They stop obsessing over the future or dwelling on the past. Instead, they cultivate a rich appreciation for the small, quiet moments, a sunrise, a conversation, the laughter of a child. And for those who had a near-death experience after a suicide attempt, something incredible happens. They no longer see death as an escape because they realize that life's problems don't magically disappear after death. Instead, they come back with the conviction that life is an opportunity, a chance to grow, to evolve, to learn the lessons they came here to learn. Even humanity's worst tendencies, war, violence, hatred, are seen differently. If we only stopped killing each other because we had proof that death isn't the end, we wouldn't have learned the real lesson. The lesson is choosing peace while we still believe in the finality of death. That is true transformation. One of the most surprising and least discussed consequences of a near-death experience is the development of psychic abilities. Between 84 and 92% of near-death experiencers report experiencing an increase in intuitive perception after their experience. But here's the thing. This doesn't happen all at once. It unfolds gradually, intensifying over the years. Many near-death experiencers find themselves suddenly aware of other people's emotions and thoughts. Some begin having precognitive dreams or an uncanny ability to know things before they happen. But here's where it gets tricky. Many struggle with these newfound abilities because they live in a culture that doesn't acknowledge that these abilities should even exist. "I couldn't talk about it," admitted one near-death experiencer. "If I did, I would have been locked up in an institution." Van Lommel found that many near-death experiencers withdraw socially, avoiding crowded places like supermarkets and public transport because they are constantly receiving information from channels beyond the five senses. And yet, according to Seth, these abilities aren't some freak anomaly. They are a preview of where human consciousness is headed. We're all evolving towards greater intuitive perception, and near-death experiencers simply get there first. A near-death experience is not just a brush with mortality. It is a collision with a higher reality. It shakes people awake. It realigns their priorities. It forces them to see the world differently. And if near-death experiences aren't just hallucinations, then they represent something even more profound, a model for how human consciousness will evolve in the future. The question is, are we ready to meet what is to come? Thank you for watching. Remember to like and subscribe. See you next time.